Have you ever seen a locked door open on its own in the middle of the night? Not in a dream. Not as someone's prank. But for real. Right before your eyes. Arif, 17. Still remembers that first night in the old school perched quietly on the hillside. He had only moved to the town a few days earlier, still unfamiliar with the slow rhythm of life and the thick, rain-soaked air. The school had no signboard, wasn't even marked on the map, locals only referred to it in vague terms, the school on the hill. The place where the drum sounds at midnight. That night, Arif was given a simple task: check that all the doors were locked, turn off every light, and finally secure the equipment room. Easy work, but for someone new to town. The stillness after 10 p.m. felt strange. The long building stretched into the darkness, with low ceilings and flickering fluorescent lights that seemed on the verge of dying. His footsteps echoed on the old tile floor, bouncing back as hollow, empty sounds. Then he stopped. At the end of the hallway, the door to classroom 3A was slightly open. He was sure it had been locked earlier that afternoon. Arif had checked every room carefully, one by one. But now, a thin sliver of light leaked out from inside, like a thread of gold in the dark. His heart pounded as he approached. Step by step. A faint whiff of burnt wood hit his nose, a smell he had never noticed anywhere in the school. Through the gap in the door, he saw a figure. Sitting at the teacher's desk. Motionless. Head tilted slightly, as if listening to something just beyond the range of human hearing. Long hair hung down, covering half the face. Arif called out softly. "Excuse me, who's there?" The figure didn't answer. Only one thing happened. Slowly. Sending a chill down his spine. That head turned. The monsoon rain fell over the small town like a gray curtain, covering every slope and every corrugated tin roof. Water streamed down mossy stone steps, carrying away dead leaves and fallen petals. At the town's edge, where a dirt road climbed toward a forgotten hill, stood a school that most official maps no longer marked. The townsfolk no longer spoke its real name. They used only hazy phrases, as if speaking it outright was unwise. The school on the hill, the place where the drum sounds at midnight, or simply, that place. By day, from afar, it looked like any other old structure, a long block of faded yellow walls and roof tiles blackened by time. But at night, the entire compound sank into an unnatural silence. A heavy stillness in which every raindrop on the leaves seemed too loud. Built over 70 years ago during the colonial era, the school was once a girls' boarding house. It had survived war, floods, and decades of neglect, patched and repaired many times over. The red hardwood floor groaned with every step. The warped wooden windows sometimes let the wind slip through, carrying the scent of dampness mixed with faint temple incense from the small shrine at the far end of the yard. Pale green fluorescent lights along the hallway buzzed faintly, flickering as if reluctant to fully illuminate the place. In the middle of the courtyard stood an ancient sea almond tree, its rough trunk draped with hanging aerial roots like dark curtains. At night, its shadow stretched far enough to shroud the old classroom block behind it, the block few people went near unless absolutely necessary. At the very end was classroom 3A, a room locked for many years, though from time to time, a dim light still leaked from its door as if someone remained inside. In the equipment room beside the guard's post, Arif, a recent transfer from Jakarta, was organizing flashlights, extension cords, and stacks of yellowed files. Helping the school warden, Pak Surya. Seemed simple enough: check the locks, turn off the lights, make sure no one was left behind after school hours. But even on that first night, Arif could feel something different. Not an obvious danger, but the strange sensation of walking inside an old photograph, where everything was too still, too slow, and somehow not entirely part of the present. The ceiling fans along the hall rotated lazily, producing a repetitive whir like an unseen metronome. At the far end, the light from the guard's post spilled over the blotched walls. Whenever the wind blew, the window frames rattled with a dry, wooden creak. And Arif noticed, although every classroom light had been switched off, there was always a faint glow coming from the direction of 3A, as if that corner could never be fully dark. Locals avoided talking about the school's past. They would only shake their heads or change the subject. But among students, whispered fragments of stories persisted. Of a female teacher in a white kabaya, of drumbeats echoing at midnight, and of gradebooks that were always open to an unfinished page. Arif didn't believe in ghosts. But here, logic didn't seem to be the only thing at play. Arif wasn't the kind of person who drew attention the first time you met him. He was of average height, slim build, with neatly cropped hair. His face was gentle, a bit thin, and his dark eyes always seemed to be pondering something. Strangers often mistook his quietness for shyness, but in truth, Arif simply preferred to listen rather than force his way into conversations. Before moving here, Arif had lived with his family in Jakarta, a city that never slept. Full of car horns and neon lights blazing through the night. But then, life changed without warning. His father lost his job. And his mother had to return to her hometown to care for a gravely ill grandmother. The family's life turned upside down. When an uncle in this small town offered to take Arif in so he could continue school, he didn't have to think twice. The hilltop school was the only one near his uncle's house. From his first day, Arif noticed how different it was from every school he had known. There was no noisy bustle after the final bell, no students hanging around the front gate. Just empty walkways and the sound of wind threading through the long corridors. On that first day, while fumbling through enrollment forms in the office, Arif met the school warden. Pak Surya, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a deep, deliberate voice. The man studied him for a long moment before asking, "Are you afraid of working night shifts?" Arif was caught off guard. In Jakarta, the idea of students doing night duty was almost unheard of. But here, perhaps things were different. He answered honestly. "I've never done it, but I think it's fine." Pak Surya nodded slightly, as if the reply had confirmed something. That very evening, Arif was assigned a new responsibility. Assist the warden in checking classrooms after school, locking doors, switching off the lights, and reporting anything unusual. For Arif, it was a chance to explore this quiet school in detail. He had always been drawn to rarely visited places, dusty storage rooms, abandoned classrooms, or hallways that never seemed to have their lights on. Back in Jakarta, he would spend hours wandering the school library just to read old books no one borrowed anymore. But his curiosity wasn't entirely carefree. Arif always carried a quiet sense of emptiness inside him, one he couldn't quite name. Moving here, he hoped to find something to fill that space, a story, an experience, maybe even a secret. What Arif didn't know was that the school was also waiting for someone like him, someone patient enough to listen, curious enough to open doors others had long ignored. In the first few days, everything seemed normal. He grew accustomed to making his rounds at sunset, when the last golden light of the day slid through the tall windows. But at night, when only he and Pak Surya remained, the school seemed to change. Every sound became sharper. Every flicker of a bulb made him glance up. He didn't yet realize that in just a few nights, his curiosity would lead him to classroom 3A, and from that moment on, there would be no turning back. After the final bell, the hilltop school became almost another world. When the last drumbeat echoed, groups of students streamed out, footsteps rushing down to the courtyard. Laughter and chatter faded, replaced by the dragging shuffle of slippers from those cleaning up, and the slow, echoing clack of classroom doors being closed one by one. Arif usually began his rounds around 5 p.m. Just as the sun slipped behind the trees on the hill, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The light filtered through old window frames. breaking into long strips that stretched across the chipped tile floor. Every step along the hallway seemed to make a soft echo, as if the walls and ceiling were quietly listening. Wooden window frames, even when firmly shut, trembled faintly with the weak breeze slipping through their warped gaps. In some panes, the paint had peeled away, revealing the dark, rough grain of weathered wood beneath. From the library at the far end came the scent of old paper, mixing with the faint incense drifting from the small shrine in the back courtyard. The fragrance wasn't strong, but it lingered stubbornly, as though it had seeped into every brick and mossy wall. Old ceiling fans turned so slowly they barely stirred the air, producing only a steady creak, in rhythm. Now and then, a fluorescent light flickered wildly, casting a pale glow that made Arif's shadow stretch long and then shrink again on the floor. Outside, the cicadas had long gone silent, replaced by the soft chorus of night insects. Sometimes, the dry, cold hoot of an owl drifted in from the forest edge. In those early shifts, Arif would circle the entire school, checking each classroom. A few still had chalkboard scrawls left from that morning. Chalk dust floated up in the air when he closed the doors. Occasionally, a worksheet would flutter to the floor, rustling as if trying to read itself aloud. When everything was too quiet, time seemed to slow. 1 minute standing at a window could stretch into what felt like an hour. He began noticing the smallest sounds, the drip of a leaking faucet in the old restroom, the scratch of dry leaves in the courtyard, the faint rattle of a desk or chair, even when the hallway appeared completely empty. Once, passing by classroom 3A, a room he had never seen anyone enter, Arif felt the brief, unsettling sensation of someone watching from inside. But when he turned, there was only the still darkness behind a dusty curtain. At night, when only Arif and Pak Surya remained, the school felt wrapped in a thicker air. Not cold, but heavy. As though the space itself was holding something back, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Arif didn't yet know that this stillness, what he thought was simply the calm of an old school, was hiding the slow, deliberate pulse of a story that had never truly ended. On his second night shift, Arif followed the same routine as before, walking the hallways, checking each classroom, locking doors, and switching off the lights. It was just after 8 p.m. The rain from earlier had stopped, but the sky was still thick with clouds, blocking most of the moonlight. From the back courtyard, the shadows of tree branches stretched long across the walls, swaying gently with each stray gust of wind. Arif approached the turn leading to the old classroom wing. The hallway here was narrower, the flickering fluorescent lights creating a broken patchwork of shadow and pale light. As he passed through each dark section, he felt almost as though he was being swallowed into emptiness, only to be released again when stepping into the next pool of light. He thought he'd grown used to this quiet, at least, that's what he believed. Until a faint sound reached him from the far end of the corridor. R. The scrape of a chair leg against the tiled floor. Arif froze, glancing toward the source of the sound, classroom 3A. The same one Pak Surya had told him flatly, no need to check that room. The noise came again, louder this time, lingering longer. For some reason, Arif's heartbeat began to quicken. He told himself, it could be a cat, or the wind shifting the furniture. But the excuse didn't hold. Every window was sealed shut, and no cat could possibly have opened that door. He walked forward slowly. With each step, the sound seemed more deliberate, like someone was drawing out his attention. When he was only a few paces away, the noise abruptly stopped. Silence. Arif stood in front of the door. The wooden panel was locked tight, its rusted padlock untouched. Yet, the curtain inside swayed slightly, as though someone had just passed by. He peered more closely. No wind. The corridor was closed off, with no draft strong enough to move it. Arif swallowed hard. For a moment, he considered unlocking the door, but immediately dismissed the idea. Curiosity aside, the cold prickle along his spine was warning him he shouldn't step inside. He took a step back, trying to appear calm, but his gaze stayed fixed on the narrow gap between the door and the frame. Inside, it was pitch dark, save for a faint spill of hallway light. He was just about to turn away when... click. The quiet sound of something falling onto wood. Like a pen hitting a desk. Arif went still. The curtain no longer moved, yet he could feel it. Something on the other side was standing there, silently watching him. He drew a deep breath, turned, and walked away quickly, resisting the urge to look back. But with each step, his own footsteps felt heavier, the echoes behind him slower, uneven. As if another set of footsteps had joined his, walking in time. From that night on, Arif couldn't help but notice classroom 3A more and more. Not because he wanted to, but because something seemed to pull his eyes toward it every time he passed. On the teacher's desk, right in the middle of the room, there was always an old gradebook. Its brown leather cover was worn, its pages yellowed. Yet the surface of the desk around it was oddly spotless, as though it was polished every night. The first time he saw it, Arif assumed someone had left it behind. But the strange part was, the next day, it was still there. And the day after that. Always in the exact same place. Each time he happened to glance through the narrow crack in the door, the gradebook would be open to a different page. It wasn't random. On every page, neat red ink filled the lines, student names, scores, remarks, written as though the grading had never stopped. One night, when the hallway light angled just right, Arif could see a list of unfamiliar names, none belonging to any current student. That night, the book lay open near the very end, and at the bottom of the page was a single empty space. There was a pen, too. An old fountain pen placed neatly across the edge of the book, its nib pointing toward the teacher's chair. He remembered Pak Surya's words, "No need to check that room." But that only made his curiosity grow. Over the next few nights, he noticed something else. Even though the hallway was dim, the corner of the desk where the gradebook sat always seemed a little brighter, not moonlight, not from the ceiling bulbs, but a warm yellow glow. Like from an old desk lamp. Then, on a light rainy night, as he passed by, Arif stopped short. The gradebook was open. The pen was still there. But this time, the nib was wet with fresh red ink. A drop still sliding down, blooming into a small circle on the page, like someone had just finished writing. The air outside was cool. Yet Arif felt a distinct warmth wafting out from the narrow gap in the door. He looked down and saw a faint streak of light across the floor inside. As if a figure had just stood up and stepped away from the desk. Arif backed away, heart pounding, and quickly walked off. But by the time he reached the end of the corridor, a strange realization hit him. In his mind, he could still see the image of that gradebook, its open page, the red letters, the final empty space. And the pen pointing toward the chair. As if waiting for him to sit down. On Arif's fourth night shift, rain pattered softly outside the windows, and the wind slipped through cracks in the old wooden frames, producing a long, thin whistle, almost like someone gently trying to call him over. It was close to 11 p.m. when, in the middle of checking the science labs, every ceiling light suddenly went out. A sharp click echoed from somewhere at the far end of the hallway. In the thick gloom, Arif pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The pale beam swept across rows of dusty lab tables, glinting off glass bottles and test tubes, warping their shapes until they looked like they were floating underwater. He had just turned to head back toward the warden's office to check the breaker when he froze. At the very edge of the light, a figure stood at the end of the hall. A woman. Tall. Wearing a white kabaya. Motionless. Her long black hair hung loose, covering most of her face. At first, Arif thought she was a teacher or staff member stranded in the storm. He called softly. "Boo. Do you need help?" She gave no reply. Only lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled slightly, as though she were listening to something beneath the floorboards. Arif swallowed and took a cautious step forward. The wooden planks underfoot groaned so loudly it made his skin prickle. When he was just 3 meters away, the woman lifted her head. And Arif almost dropped his phone. Her eye sockets were empty. No iris, no white. Just 2 deep, lightless voids. Instinct made him step back, but before he could turn, another sound broke the air, the long creak of hinges. The door to classroom 3A, directly behind her, was swinging open. Slowly. From within spilled a faint golden glow, stretching the woman's shadow far across the cracked tiles. Through that glow, Arif could see the teacher's desk. And the gradebook, lying open, the red fountain pen resting exactly in place. The woman stepped aside as though making room for him to enter. She moved with painful slowness, every flutter of her white sleeve was visible, every brush of fabric on tile producing a dry, scraping sound. Arif felt the blood drain from his body. His muscles locked in place. Part of him wanted to run. But another part was being drawn toward that open door. Inside, a faint silhouette wavered. Could be someone, or not someone at all. And as Arif edged backward, her empty gaze followed him without a single blink. The next morning, the sky was overcast. Gray clouds covering the hill. The wind's howl through the corridors made the old school seem to shudder. Arif sat in the warden's office, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Its warmth doing nothing to drive away the chill lodged in him since the night before. He hadn't told anyone what he'd seen. Not because he feared being laughed at, but because he wasn't sure if it had been real, or just the hallucination of an exhausted mind. Pak Surya, the old warden, entered carrying a large ring of keys that clinked as he set them down. He glanced at Arif, not curious, not suspicious. Just as if he had seen this exact scene many times before. Last night, in 3A, was there anyone there? Arif asked carefully. Pak Surya didn't answer right away. He hung the keys on their hook, sat opposite Arif, and tapped his thin fingers slowly on the table. Classroom 3A, he repeated. Voice raspy like smoke-stained paper. You know why it's always locked? Arif shook his head. Pak Surya sighed. Eyes drifting toward the window where the wind was stirring the branches of an ancient tree. Many years ago, when I just started working here, there was a fire during an exam. It started in the equipment room and spread to 3A. A female teacher, Buratna, didn't make it out. He paused, as if choosing his next words. They say, before she died, she was still in the middle of grading papers. And since then, every rainy season, the classroom light turns on. The gradebook is open. The tests get marked. A cold line ran down Arif's spine. Who marks them? He asked, though the answer was already forming in his mind. Pak Surya met his eyes. The names in the book, the class must be full. If one is missing, she will look for it. The air in the small room seemed to contract. The ticking of the clock grew unnaturally loud, each tick, talk like water dripping into an empty room. Before leaving, Pak Surya added in a near whisper. If she ever offers you something, don't take it. Remember my words. That sentence clung to Arif for the rest of the morning. Like a shadow he couldn't shake. That afternoon, the sky hung heavy and gray, pressing down on the hill as if it might collapse at any moment. When the dismissal bell rang, students streamed toward the gate, leaving behind an empty, silent school. Arif stayed, as usual. He walked the corridors, checking each classroom door. The click of the lock sounding crisp under his fingers. Everything seemed normal, until he returned to the warden's office to put the keys away. On his desk, bare when he'd left that morning, sat something unfamiliar. A fountain pen. Its black lacquered body gleamed faintly, metal accents dulled with age. The cap bore tiny, intricate patterns, like the ones on old notebooks from his grandparents' time. Arif picked it up. It was ice cold, not the chill of metal left under an air conditioner, but a deeper, more unsettling cold. As if it had just been pulled from the bottom of a well. He uncapped it. The nib shone with fresh, wet red ink. Not dried residue, but glistening under the light, like it had just been dipped in the inkwell. A single drop slid down onto his finger, leaving a stain the color of diluted blood. His heartbeat quickened. Pak Surya's words from that morning flashed through his mind. If she ever offers you something, don't take it. Arif looked around the room. No one. No sign anyone had been there. The door was still locked, the keys still hanging where they belonged. He set the pen down and stepped back. But his gaze clung to it, as if some invisible thread was tugging him toward it. A faint click came from somewhere, making him flinch. When he looked back at the desk, the old gradebook was there. It lay open to a completely blank page, the first space empty of any name. At the page's edge, faint red blotches spread outward, as though someone had just tested the pen but hadn't finished writing. Cold sweat prickled down his back. However it had gotten there. This was no accident. And now that it sat on his desk, he had been chosen. That night. Rain poured early, steady and unrelenting, as though trying to wash the town away. The metallic drumming on the office roof mixed with the rattling of the wooden window frames under the lash of the wind. Arif sat at his desk, eyes fixed on a textbook he couldn't read a single word of. The fountain pen lay shut in the drawer, but he could feel it watching him. Near midnight, drowsiness swept over him. He slumped forward onto the desk without realizing. When he opened his eyes, he was sitting in a classroom. Not the warden's office. Not any classroom he'd seen in daylight. The desks and chairs were dark, polished wood, gleaming as if freshly waxed. Outside, the rain still fell, but its sound was distant, as though it came from somewhere far away. The room was full, every seat occupied by students in old-style uniforms, white shirts, long skirts or slacks, the kind you might see in photographs from the 1980s. All had their heads bowed. Silent. Not one of them moved. At the front, a woman stood tall on the podium, her back perfectly straight beneath a white kabaya, her long hair spilling down. Buratna. No one needed to tell him, it was her. She lifted her face. Though her eyes lacked pupils, they still locked onto him, piercing and unblinking. Then she spoke his name. Her voice came from everywhere at once, not loud, not echoing, but sharp enough to tear through the stillness. Sit down, Arif. We're not finished. Her hand extended, holding the old gradebook, open to that same blank line. Beside it lay the black fountain pen, the red ink gleaming. Before Arif could react, the world went dark. When he opened his eyes again, he was really in classroom 3A. Rain still streaked the windows. The air smelled of damp wood and age. On the teacher's desk before him, the gradebook and the fountain pen waited, exactly as in the dream. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. From the back row, a wooden chair scraped softly against the floor. No one sat there. But Arif knew. He was not alone. The next morning, Arif went straight to Pak Surya, the warden, and placed the office keys firmly in his hand. His voice was hoarse. I can't do the night shift anymore. I'm sorry. Pak Surya looked at him for a few seconds, gave a slight nod, and walked away without asking a single question. It was as if he understood better than anyone else what had happened. Leaving the school brought Arif a brief sense of relief. He thought that by staying far from that place, everything would finally end. That evening, the sky was clear. The wind soft and cool, nothing like the rain-drenched night before. In his small rented room, Arif sat at his desk, trying to focus on homework, shoving away any memory of the hilltop school. Until he saw it. On his desk, where only textbooks and a few cheap ballpoint pens had been, now sat an old, worn gradebook. It was already open. In the center of the page, his name was written in careful, neat letters, in fresh red ink. Right next to it, the last grade box was still empty. Leaning against the spine of the book was the same black fountain pen he had seen in classroom 3A. Arif felt the blood drain from his body. He shot to his feet, backing toward the door. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, as if it had been sealed for hours. The ceiling light flickered, then steadied, but its glow had shifted to a pale yellow, identical to the light in that abandoned classroom. Outside the window, the wind whipped the curtains, but over it, Arif heard another sound. The slow, deliberate squeak of chalk against a blackboard. Drawing. Writing. Finishing something. He edged toward his desk, trembling, and lifted the gradebook. And beneath the paper, the smell hit him. Smoke. Damp wood. The scent of classroom 3A. As if the book had never left that place. He dropped it to the floor, retreating to press his back against the wall. That's when he realized. In the small mirror hanging in the corner of the room, a figure sat at his desk, wearing a white kabaya, head bent, writing. It wasn't his reflection. It wasn't an illusion. It was her. Buratna. And this time, she had found her way to him. The midnight drum. That night, Arif didn't sleep. He sat against the wall, eyes locked on the small mirror in the corner. The figure in white had long since vanished. But the fountain pen still rested neatly on the desk, beside the open gradebook. The empty grade box still waited. The clock ticked forward with unbearable slowness. 11:59. 1 minute before midnight. The air went still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, boom, boom, boom. The school drum. Deep. Heavy. 3 beats, rolling through the walls, spilling into the night. Arif knew that sound. It was the same as the rumor, the midnight drum of the hilltop school. Except now, he was hearing it from his own room. A faint yellow light crept through the window. Not from the street lamp, but from something moving closer. Slowly. The entire room filled with that pale, classroom light. As if he were once again sitting in 3A. His heartbeat thundered. The curtains shifted, then drew aside on their own. In the mirror, behind him, Buratna stood. White kabaya. Loose hair. A gentle smile. And eyes, hollow and black. In her hands, the gradebook, and the red fountain pen. She walked closer. Each step syncing perfectly with the 4th, 5th, 6th drumbeat. The yellow light etched every blurred line of her face. Arif wanted to turn, wanted to run. But his body refused to move. Only when her ice-cold fingers touched his shoulder did the drum fall silent. In that moment, red ink bled into the final empty box, spreading through the paper like blood seeping into cloth. The screen faded to black. Only slow, echoing footsteps remained, and a voice, barely a whisper, slipped through the mic. Now, the class is full. If you've stayed with me until now, I just want to say one thing: thank you. Thank you for listening, not just to a story about a classroom, a gradebook, or a shadow in the night. But about things left unfinished. About promises never kept. And about people, or spirits, trapped in the very last moment of their lives. You see, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't the midnight drum, or the hollow eyes of someone long gone. It's the realization that you've been living the same day over and over. Too afraid to step beyond the edge of your comfort zone. Arif was just a transfer student, yet he ended up on a roster he never meant to join. And like him, many of us, maybe you, maybe me, find ourselves bound to something we don't belong to. A job that's drained every spark from us. A relationship where respect has withered. A habit that shrinks us, little by little. Each day. And here's the thing. If you don't leave by choice, there will come a day when you won't be allowed to leave at all. Not by supernatural force. But by life's own repetition. The same reasons, the same excuses, the same fear of starting over. Your gut feeling, that quiet voice that says, "This place isn't for me," isn't something you should ignore. If a place makes you feel suffocated, go. If someone makes you forget who you are, go. Even if it's just one step. Even if it's just to breathe. Because not every open door should be walked through. And not every empty classroom is meant for you. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoy tales that blend the supernatural with emotions that linger long after, don't forget to like, share, and hit the notification bell. I post new videos every week. I'll see you in the next story.